So why don't we examine the schema and create a class from it? Okay, interesting idea. Not so easy in the Java era. Unless you're using something like Ruby or a dynamic language that runs across top of JVM. But what are you spitting out these Java files? Not as perfect as one could hope. But suddenly, and in the nick of time to save us, come these dynamic languages like Python and Ruby. And also at this time, the culture in technology development was shifting. We're getting more very small startups. We get a lot of application programmers being pressed in the DBA. Postgres helped this a lot because you didn't have to go and buy Oracle. You downloaded MySQL, you downloaded Postgres, you installed it, you ran it. It basically worked. So why do we need this super expensive DBA for it? The VC's never going to fund one of those anyway. But these people are like, there are 3 of them in a garage with angel funding trying to bang out this application. They do not have time to learn complicated SQL. Ain't going to happen. There was also a culture shift in this drove the culture shift of databases increasingly being viewed as a data store, as a pure object store, as a place to slam your objects in. Because we're losing this sort of ancestral knowledge from the DBAs of enterprise data modeling, and instead it's, here's where I put my stuff. My being the application. And then in 2003, Martin Fowler, bless his heart, decided he had invented ORMs, because he'd never heard of them before, and in his book, published a pattern called active record. And from which we get active record in Rails. Interestingly enough, I like to say Rails active record because active record is actually a generic term, the way ORM is a generic term. It's basically a particular architecture of ORM. But most people, when they see the one that everyone knows about is the one Rails implemented. Ruby on Rails, of course. It analyzes the schema and produces the class for you because it's Ruby. You do anything you want, a lot like Python in that regard. Of course, this does mean the clients of the class have to stay ahead of the interface. So you have to make sure that your code lines up with it because there's no compiler to tell you this all hooks up correctly. But okay, people have infinite patience for this kind of thing in dynamic languages because you need it. And it does require a language that can extend classes on the fly, but Ruby and Python can do that, so we're okay there. This drove a brand new way of looking at ORMs, which was the application down approach, which is Django in Python. The Django framework in Python is the exemplar of this. You define the object model in the application, which of course you do anyway, and then you create the database off of that object model. None of this having to plug into this gross old legacy database. No legacy databases at all. We build the whole database from scratch based on the application's object model. Ooh, that's nice. That'll teach those old SQL people. Well, we don't want to learn SQL, so we're going to create a brand new query language that doesn't look like SQL, and it is better because it doesn't look like SQL. Because we know SQL is bad. And so bang, see, that's not bad, You create this class, and this is the Django tutorial application. And, you create char fields. It's like, this is a whole lot more readable than create a table statement, isn't it? All right, maybe not. But no one had to write a line of SQL. That's great.
The database, for example, is a storing key. You need to know the what's that you are putting stuff in the database in the relation. If you come to this, you see that there's some system error.
Well, you are right, and I will tell you exactly how Django programmers. Yeah, I mean, and I will tell you exactly how Django programmers and Python programmers react to your extremely true statement, which is, I can't hear you. No, I don't have to learn any SQL. I don't have to know it's a database. There's a lot of denial. But you're right. You're absolutely right. You do have to know a lot about the data. Ultimately, the database asserts itself, like the bedrock poking through the soil, whether you believe it or not. But first blush, they say, problem solved. We're done. The application writer does not need to learn SQL. And application programmers hate SQL. I cannot emphasize this point enough because it is almost surreal walking into shops. No, really, they hate SQL. I see people shaking their heads, and I understand on an individual basis, you know, I'm an application programmer, I love SQL, I think it's the coolest thing ever, but you walk into an arbitrary shop, and you say SQL, and it's like the shutters slam down. Of like, you think the whole reason they got into it is because, you know, they were chased around by SQL as a child or something. You know, there's really no, the level of resistance to learning SQL is extremely high. And they've accomplished their job. Which they think their job is, I need a place to store my objects with a minimum of hassle where I don't have to write a bunch of nasty SQL, I don't have to learn about relational databases. From the point of view of the average application programmer, their problem is solved. And it's important to remember that. And the most important part is they get the demo running up very fast. These frameworks are very fast to get prototypes going. When you deploy them, then you have the problem. But there's even more good news. It doesn't stop there. The application is database independent. Because since this underlying machine is generating the SQL for you, it can figure out all these differences between databases. So you can run SQLite on your laptop and then deploy to Postgres. And because every shop in the middle of the night just wakes up and says, you know, we should move from Postgres to MySQL or back and forth. I mean, this happens all the time, right? They just do this overnight. I mean, it's a very common operation. I'm being sarcastic, of course. But they're sold that this is a really useful feature. At any moment, they could throw a switch and move to a different database. And they don't want to lose this very important feature, he said sarcastically. And you don't have to hire any of those expensive SQL people, except when your application crashes and burns in production. But that's okay, you know, I'm happy for the work. And if we're just stuffing objects in the database, why do we need SQL in the first place? I mean, why do we need this? It's like, wait, light bulb goes on. We're doing all this work just to serialize an object and cram it into a database. What, you know, I mean, come on. You know, my dad used to listen to SQL on his 8-track. This is dad technology. We don't need this anymore. Let's switch to MongoDB. It's web scale. I heard. My cool friend with the haircut and the fixie told me that it was a web scale database. I should use that instead, because all I'm doing is slamming these objects into it. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, and on this note, we're going to take about a 10-minute break so I can drink my coffee, and we'll be back at 10 minutes to